All right, let's dive right in. Today we're tackling two of the biggest issues facing India, poverty and employment. We're going to look at something pretty wild, how a simple calorie count can decide who's officially considered poor. We'll also get into why these problems are so tough to solve and what's actually being done to try and break the cycle. So, let's get started.
Wow. This quote from Mahatma Gandhi just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? He's asking a fundamental question. What's the point of all this economic progress if it just leaves people behind, literally starving on the streets? This tension between what looks good on paper and what's happening to real people, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
Okay, so before we can even begin to talk about solutions, we all need to be on the same page. How does a country officially define who is poor and who isn't? It's not just a feeling, it's a number. It's a line that has to be drawn somewhere.
And this is it, the poverty line. That's the official benchmark. Now, get this, it's not about being able to afford rent or school fees or anything like that. We are talking about the absolute rock-bottom minimum you need just to survive. And it all boils down to one surprisingly basic thing: calories.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. The poverty line isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. If you live in a rural area, the line is set at 2,400 calories a day. But if you're in a city, it's actually lower, 2,100 calories. So why the difference? Well, it's pretty straightforward, really. Work in rural areas is often much more physically demanding. People literally need more fuel in the tank to get by.
So, how does India's measure stack up on the world stage? Well, to give us some perspective, the World Bank uses a single global standard for extreme poverty. It's $1.90 per person per day. Using one number like this helps us compare the situation across different countries and get that bigger global picture.
And this just shows you how tangled up poverty and employment really are. Think about the textile workers in Ahmedabad. These weren't people who grew up in extreme poverty. They had stable, middle-class jobs. But then the mills closed, and their livelihoods just disappeared overnight. It's a really stark reminder of how fragile economic security can be.
Okay, so we've got the what. We understand how poverty is measured. But now we have to ask the much harder question: why? Why does it persist? What are the underlying forces that keep millions of people trapped in this vicious cycle?
Sometimes the clearest answers come from individual stories. Let's talk about Swapna. This isn't some abstract theory. For so many people, this is reality. She's a small farmer who did everything right. She took out a loan to invest in her crops, but then disaster struck. Pests wiped out the harvest, and just like that, one bit of bad luck was enough to send her into a dead spiral she couldn't escape.
Swapna's story is a textbook example of what economists call indebtedness. And man, is it a vicious cycle. Think about it. You have to borrow money because you're poor. But then, because you're poor, you can't pay the loan back, which only makes you poorer. It is an economic trap, and it is incredibly hard to break free from.
But it's not always about individual bad luck. Sometimes there are much bigger systemic forces at work. Take social exclusion. This is a huge one. It's when entire groups of people are systematically shut out from the very things that could help them escape poverty. We're talking good schools, decent jobs, even basic healthcare. It creates these barriers that have nothing to do with a person's talent or their work ethic.
Okay, so we've defined the problem and looked at some of the deep-rooted causes. So what's the plan? What's the government's playbook for trying to tackle a challenge this massive? Well, the approach has basically been a two-pronged attack.
The strategy has two main parts. First, the big picture approach: grow the entire economy. You know the old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats? The theory is, a bigger economy means more jobs and resources for everyone. But they also realize that the tide doesn't reach everyone equally. So that's the second part: targeted programs. These are schemes designed to throw a direct lifeline to those who need it most.
And it's so important to remember that these policies don't just appear out of nowhere. A lot of the time, they are a direct result of public pressure. When you see images like this, it reminds you that the demand for jobs, for dignity, for a decent life, that is a powerful political force that can really push governments to take action.
A really huge piece of this whole puzzle is moving beyond traditional farming. For decades, agriculture has been supporting too many people on too little income, which makes them incredibly vulnerable. So the key is to create new opportunities in what's called the non-farm economy.
And this gives you a sense of just one part of that non-farm economy. Look at livestock here. Poultry alone is more than 60% of the sector. For millions of small farming families, having a few chickens or a goat isn't just a side hustle, it's a critical safety net. It's what provides a steady income when the crops fail.
So, this brings us to where we stand today. We've looked at the problem, the causes, and the strategies. But what's the verdict now? Well, there has definitely been progress, but the fight is far from over, and in many ways, it's getting even more complex. And there is good news. These strategies have worked in some places. States like Kerala and Tamil Nadu have made real, measurable progress. They've had significant success in reducing poverty. And they've done it with smart policies, investing in people through education and healthcare, and tackling tough issues like land reform. It really proves that poverty isn't inevitable. It can be reduced. But here's where we hit the modern challenge. Look at this number, 30%. That is the unemployment rate for young, university-educated women in rural India. Let that sink in for a second. It's a staggering statistic, and it points to a deep, new problem. Getting an education is no longer a guaranteed ticket to getting a job.
So, we end with this question, which is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? There is no doubt that India's economy is growing and creating a lot of wealth. The numbers prove it. But the crucial question is whether that growth is translating into enough good jobs and real opportunities for everyone, from a farmer like Swapna to a young graduate in a village. And that, well, that remains the unfinished fight.